Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. It's been a few weeks since we last talked, and we're going to be going around the top rookie performances since then. But I think a good place to start would be the Offensive Rookie of the Year race because things have really changed. 4 weeks ago, we were talking about kind of a two-horse race between Kenneth Walker and Dameon Pierce. They've dropped off a little bit in terms of productivity. Meanwhile, Garrett Wilson has started to put together some really good performances. Chris Olave has continued to play really well for the Saints, and we've had the stunning emergence of Christian Watson to the tune of 8 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks. So, Alex, who do you think really the one or two front runners among this group for Offensive Rookie of the Year?
I feel like it's going to be the two wide receivers from Ohio State, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. I feel like, like you mentioned, the running backs, Kenneth Walker and Dameon Pierce, have kind of tailed off a little bit, kind of settled in. Past weeks haven't really done anything too extraordinary. And honestly, it's a little bit surprising for me for Kenneth Walker. I expected him to, keep a nice high pace going and kind of become the favorite. But I think for me, the two favorites right now should be Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Olave's really been stellar all season. Obviously, he's playing with some poor quarterback play with the Saints, but in spite of the quarterback, he's still played really well. I think he's been the most consistent wide receiver throughout the whole season. And I think Garrett Wilson has really come on the past few weeks. He had some splashy games early on, but the past 2 weeks, I think it's been close to 300 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, and I think he's a dynamic playmaker for the Jets.
Yeah, I would agree with you that Chris Olave would probably deserve it the most right now, especially considering that he's on a really poor offense. But I think if the season ended right now, the Offensive Rookie of the Year would be Kenneth Walker. I think especially because of the production that he's accumulated, particularly in the red zone. I mean, if you look at his number of touchdowns, he's got 9 compared to just 3 for Olave, 3 for Pierce, 4 for Wilson. Watson does have 8, but I think his really quiet first half of the season and the lack of total yardage right now is going to hurt him. So I don't really see him being in the race, even though right now he's actually number 3 in the betting odds. I think Kenneth Walker would be the one getting it, although I think with how things are going, it'll end up being Olave or Wilson. And if I were to have to make my pick, I'm going to say everything being done at the end of the season, Garrett Wilson's the Offensive Rookie of the Year. I just think the pace that he's at these last few weeks, he's absolutely clicking with Mike White. And I think if there's for some reason is yet another quarterback change, at this point, he's matured enough throughout this season that he's going to be able to be super productive regardless. I mean, he had 160-something yards this week. He's on fire. I think it'll be really close between him and Olave, and Kenneth Walker will definitely still be in that conversation, maybe even Dameon Pierce too, but I'm excited to see how this ends up unfolding. Right now, I would say it'll end up being Wilson.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I think he, like you mentioned, he's really come on the past few weeks. He's really solidified himself as a wide receiver 1. And obviously, he was our Offensive Rookie of the Week for the past 2 weeks. So I think he's really on a really great trajectory. So I wouldn't be surprised with either the two Ohio receivers, but I'll take Garrett Wilson as well, just because he's really on an upward trajectory.
Absolutely. I want to talk about Christian Watson a little bit more. I mean, we were asking who's going to be this rookie class's equivalent of Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we gave a nod to James Cook, for example, and he is starting to come on stronger, but I think we failed to mention the guy who really was going to go from being super quiet to boom, he's a star, and that's Christian Watson. I mean, he's the focal point of that Packers offense. Each week, part of me is maybe this is the week he has another quiet outing. Absolutely not. He's scoring multiple touchdowns most weeks now. What I'm especially thinking about is just how good can Christian Watson become? Because if you look at the plays he's making right now, it's almost entirely based on his physical traits. He's catching the ball and he's outrunning everyone, or he's just getting the ball in the backfield and outrunning everyone. He isn't a really good route runner yet, and I think that if he can develop that asset in his skill set, then he can be one of the very best wide receivers in the league.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that some scouts I feel like had him in that first round conversation. I don't think we did, and it was kind of because of how raw he was.
Mhm.
Right? We saw those athletic traits. Obviously, he's 6'4". He's really big. The biggest issue for me, like you mentioned, he's not a great route runner. We thought it would take him some time to transition to the NFL level, and we also saw some big drops in college, and obviously we saw that week one. But I don't really think he struggled with that since.
Mhm.
I'm really impressed with how quick his transition, especially not even from college, but from week one, week two,
Yeah.
week three. He didn't really do much to now where he is, and it really seems like him and Rodgers are really clicking now, and Rodgers seems to trust him a lot.
Absolutely. I think he's just going to keep lighting up the football field every week for the rest of the season. Another guy that I wanted to touch on who's come on strong, especially with a couple really splash plays, is Marcus Jones. I don't even want to call him a cornerback because he's just the everything guy in New England now. They picked him in the third round with the 85th pick, and he had the game-winning punt return touchdown against the Jets a couple weeks ago. He had a 48-yard touchdown reception against the Bills, even though he's actually nominally a cornerback, and that's primarily what he played in college. I think he's a really interesting case because it's making me rethink a little bit. When you have a guy who's a really good returner and you think, just get the ball in his hands and he's going to make plays, how high are you willing to draft that guy? I thought the third round was high for Marcus Jones because as a 5'8" cornerback, I thought he proved to be kind of a liability in coverage on tape. I didn't really like how he would transition to the NFL, but he's winning the Patriots games or keeping them in games right now, despite not showing anything on the defensive side of the ball. So I think it's a really interesting discussion. What do you take of Marcus Jones's emergence?
Yeah, I mean, I'm shocked. I think we saw that dynamic playmaking ability in college. He had, was it six return touchdowns, I think,
I think so.
in college. So we knew he had that ability and that potential. And I agree. I thought the third round a little high, but I mean, if you can use him, as a gadget player on offense a little bit, he provides you some depth on defense, and obviously he's going to be a return guy. I mean, he fills a lot of needs with one player,
True.
and I think that's a huge reason why the Patriots obviously drafted him in the third round. And I think, the way that football is evolving now, it's not just chuck the ball deep. There's so many different options where let's just get the ball in our playmakers' hands and let them do the rest. And Marcus Jones is kind of that guy. Will he become a full-time gadget player? Not really sure yet. Bill would be the one to do it. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Tyreek Hill early on in his career, where he wasn't that wide receiver one. And I'm not comparing him to Tyreek Hill now, but Tyreek was used in a similar way to Marcus Jones. He was the punt return guy, and then once in a while he was thrown in on the offense when they were looking for a spark. So I think, that might be how he gets used. And I wouldn't be shocked to see some other teams kind of take some of these gadget players earlier in the draft than they have in the past.
Do you think Marcus Jones might actually become a wide receiver in the NFL?
I don't become a full-time receiver. I think he could definitely, especially with the Patriots, I could see him being used as a gadget player. He'd probably be their full-time return man for a while, and a couple plays here on offense, and then if they need him on defense, he can play defense as well. That's kind of what I see from him. But what do you think?
Um, I think it's hard to see him getting on the football field and performing well at cornerback, but at the same time, it's really hard to transition from one side of the ball to the other once you get to the NFL. So I would opt towards thinking that it's going to stay kind of like how he's been used right now. He's the full-time return specialist, and that's already a very valuable role with how good he is at doing that. And then you get him on offense every now and then when you can get the ball in his hands, let him make some plays in open field, scheme things up open for him. So I would agree with you that I don't see him becoming a full-time wide receiver, but I'm sure it's something that Bill Belichick has thought of. Like, why not? Why not? If I don't think I'm going to use him on defense, if he's buried down that cornerback depth chart, it's something to consider. That's all I'm saying.
And you can set up these punt return-esque plays like the Patriots did in that Bills game, where you kind of throw it behind the line of scrimmage, you allow offensive linemen, wide receivers, tight ends to get out in front of them and let them kind of see the whole field and kind of make something happen. And especially with the Chiefs, we saw some plays like that with Tyreek Hill, and I'd expect to see those plays with the Patriots.
Yeah, I agree. So there's another guy that was taken before everyone we've discussed so far. That's the first overall pick, Travon Walker. And man, I was just it came to me yesterday. We haven't heard about Travon Walker. Like, this is a number one overall pick who, past the halfway point in his rookie season, he's generated very little buzz. We heard about him week one when he had a nice sack, and he's gone off the radar since then. And you would think that if a number one pick is playing all the time, it's not like he's hurt and he's not being productive, people would be really bashing him. But we don't really hear any of that either. So it's kind of an anomaly to me why right now Travon Walker is making zero headlines in either direction.
Yeah, I think this is kind of what I would have expected from Travon Walker. We didn't see production in college. And a lot of people said, oh, it's the Georgia scheme, it's this, it's that. He was rotated in and out, which I can understand to an extent. But at the end of the day, if you're a number one overall pick, you should be generating a lot of sacks. You should be generating a lot of plays. And not to hate on Walker, he's a really good player. I just never thought that he was first overall pick caliber. And I had him graded out as like a mid to late first round pick. And if a mid to late first round pick was kind of doing what he's doing right now, I don't think anyone would bat an eye. I think his athleticism, his physical trait might have definitely overhyped a little bit, his combine performance, all of this. And that kind of led him to rise up the draft board all the way to first overall. And I feel like he's not getting any negative attention because of his lack of production, possibly because people don't want to get that, maybe he was reach out first overall. Because I feel like a lot of the people that would highlight, oh, he's not putting up first overall production, might be the same people that were saying, oh, his athleticism off the charts and he should be first overall. So they don't really want to admit that mistake yet. And we're only halfway through his first season. So he has a lot of time to grow and develop and become a top player in like the Jazz hope to be.
I think that's a really good point. Is I'm not surprised. Same with you that he's been relatively quiet because he just was not a refined pass rusher. He didn't have the proper technique to get to the quarterback around the edge, and we're not seeing him do that consistently enough yet at the NFL level. But the question really will be, can he take the step forward from year 1 to 2 and then from year 2 to 3? I think the next couple seasons will be really crucial. And he does deserve a pass so far because it was a big projection. He's being used so differently than he was at Georgia. But I think that if we get to this point next year and he's still producing so little, then it would feel wrong for me if it's still really quiet around talking about him in NFL circles and everyone's still giving him that pass. Because with just how many people in the media and in the NFL were in love with Travon Walker because of those traits, I feel like there is a lot of motivation, as you were alluding to really wait as long as possible to start talking and criticizing about Travon Walker.
And in their defense, I don't think anyone expected him to be, the best player, from the draft class on day one. I think a lot of people the Jaguars drafted him knowing he was a little bit of a projection and developmental piece with what they saw as a sky high potential. I'm not sure I would say that, but in their defense, right, he wasn't a guy that was supposed to come in day one and just be lights out, like a Micah Parsons was. He wasn't supposed to be.
I think there was some hope, though. I think what we're seeing from Tariq Woolen, which is a really raw player, just getting to the NFL and, with NFL coaching and an NFL scheme playing to his strengths, he's just going absolutely playing incredibly. I think that there was some hope that would be the case. Just some people saw his skill set and was like, man, we use him this way. He's a star from day one. So I would assume that those people also anticipated the opposite outcome, in which it does take him a while to learn his trade in the NFL. But I do think that there was some hope that he would be a star on day one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I'm going to give him a pass for now. He hasn't played extremely poorly where he's a liability on defense. He just hasn't really put up first overall production. But again, a lot of time to develop for him, and hopefully that Jaguars defense can continue to improve with all those young pieces that they have. Devin Lloyd, who's been a really good defensive player, his name has just kind of gotten lost in the shuffle because of those top cornerbacks in Sauce and Woolen.
Yeah. Let's move on a little bit towards a couple hot topics that do still pertain to the NFL draft in one way or another. The first one being a really puzzling move by the Titans to fire general manager John Robinson on Tuesday. And when I think about that move, John Robinson was a guy that I liked for a long time. I mean, if you look at the list of draft selections that he hit on, it includes the likes of Derrick Henry, Jeffrey Simmons, A.J. Brown, Jack Conklin, Harold Landry. There were a few misses like Caleb Farley, Isaiah Wilson, and Corey Davis, but in the globality of it, he did definitely accumulate talent on that team. Now, when I think about why he got fired, I think that the offense's extreme struggles this season are in large part because of two moves that were his decision. One, in 2020, when he extended Ryan Tannehill, and two, when he traded A.J. Brown away this offseason and didn't really replace him except for a raw player in a rookie, Treylon Burks. But what I think is really interesting about this is if you go back 2 years when the Titans put together a really good season, they eliminated the New England Patriots in Tom Brady's last game in the playoffs, and then they were faced with Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry being free agents on the open market. I was really torn on what decision to make about both those players. You have a guy in Ryan Tannehill who was not a franchise quarterback for much of his career, but turned in a career year, and a running back who you're going to be hesitant to pay running backs. I think that John Robinson would have gotten fired with either decision that he made there. Ryan Tannehill got signed to that extension. He has not been good enough, and the offense has stalled as a result. But I think if 2 years ago you don't extend Ryan Tannehill and you're pinned towards the back of the draft order, you're not going to find a different solution at quarterback. So I think it's really unlucky by John Robinson, especially regarding that situation. And I would hope that he would get signed by another team as general manager because he deserves another shot.
Oh, I totally agree. He deserves another shot. And I think he had to sign Tannehill, the position that he was in. Tannehill, like you said, was a free agent. I mean, your quarterback just brought you to much further than anyone expected. No one expected them to be a strong playoff team that year. And that year they made it all the way to the AFC Championship game, correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, they were one of the top teams in the NFL.
They might have lost the following game to the Ravens, right? Or no, they beat the Ravens, right?
Yeah, they went all the way to the
AFC Championship game.
Yep. And lost to the Chiefs.
Yes, that's right.
So you have to sign that quarterback. And in his defense, it wasn't a long-term deal. I'm pretty sure it was 3 years. And so, I mean, if he has one really good year like he had and then signs that 3-year extension, maybe in theory, right, that first year's bad, regardless, you're going to give him another shot. He had one really good year, one bad year. So that's that second year, that third year, or that 3-year deal. I think he had to sign Tannehill to the extension. At the time, I thought it was a good decision. It wasn't a massive deal. He wasn't tying up a ton of money. Signing Derrick Henry, I think, was a good deal. Obviously, this season has been down a little bit. Last season before his injury, really good. The season before, really good. I think the biggest issue is A.J. Brown. And I think that was kind of the statement that the Titans owners made when they fired him 2 days after playing A.J. Brown. And A.J. Brown torched them, and they don't really have wide receivers. And, they took Treylon Burks to be his replacement, who has been, a little bit disappointing because I think they expected him to come in and be that A.J. Brown guy because A.J. Brown was good his rookie year. So I think the nail in the coffin for him was trading away A.J. Brown when you probably should have paid him because you had no other wide receivers on that team. And Tannehill's not a quarterback that could elevate his receivers.
I agree with you. It might have ended up coming down to more the A.J. Brown issue than the Ryan Tannehill issue. Because as much as it comes down to Tannehill because he hasn't been good enough, if A.J. Brown was still there, that offense would probably be good enough to keep John Robinson's job at least through the rest of the season. I just wonder to what extent it was possible to make a deal with him. on one side, you can say that he was unhappy. He was not being easy in the contract negotiations, which is understandable. He's one of the top receivers in the game, and he wanted to be paid like one. But we saw a similar situation in San Francisco with Deebo Samuel, in Seattle with DK Metcalf, in Washington with Terry McLaurin, and each of those teams managed to figure it out and retain their guy. I mean, and Deebo Samuel, it seemed like he was having even more of a dispute with the 49ers than A.J. Brown with the Titans. So it really does make you wonder, could they have retained A.J. Brown? The answer is probably yes, if they were willing to make the financial commitment.
I think that this is just my opinion. I think that John Robinson said, you know what? I don't want to pay you $20+ million a year. I'll trade you and I'll get someone just as good as you in the draft. I think he had supreme confidence in himself that he would find somebody in the draft and he'd say, we won't miss you if we trade you away, and draft who became Treylon Burks. I think that's a poor decision. I was a big fan of Treylon Burks.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you're drafting Treylon Burks to become A.J. Brown, so what are you going to do in 3 years if Treylon Burks becomes A.J. Brown? Are you going to trade him away again? At some point, you're going to have to pay the wide receiver. That's true. Why not pay the wide receiver that you drafted 3 years ago? He was a great draft pick, second-round pick. Why not pay the guy that you already drafted? You don't have to worry about finding a placement that you hope to be as good or better that you're just going to have to pay 2-3 years down the line.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that Treylon Burks could be as good as A.J. Brown in 3 years. I absolutely think so. I loved him in the draft process, and I believe in his talent. I think he's starting to put together some of the flashes. But the fact is, you let a guy who you already knew was one of the top receivers in the NFL go on a question mark, because any rookie's a question mark. So I would agree with you there that was probably where they went wrong, although it does still tie back to that quarterback, because if you have one of the top 10 quarterbacks, top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, he can probably elevate that rookie and speed up his process of becoming a star wide receiver more than Ryan Tannehill could. And Tannehill just kind of fell to the level of his supporting cast this year.
Yeah, he did. And I don't think anyone would have batted an eye if the Titans took Treylon Burks while still having A.J. Brown.
Yeah.
Two wide receivers in today's NFL.
Yeah.
So I don't think anyone would have had a problem with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now let's move on to another really interesting topic that somehow didn't generate as much buzz as I think it should, and that's former Saints head coach Sean Payton saying in an interview with Colin Cowherd that at some point we're going to move to a lottery system in the NFL draft. And he said, if you're unfamiliar with that, it would be kind of like in the NBA where the top or the worst team is not guaranteed the top pick. They enter a lottery that's weighted based on where you finished in the NFL standings, where you're not guaranteed the top pick, but you're going to get one of the first few picks. And this is a really interesting idea because it would totally shake up the NFL draft order and determining how that would look like. And I think the other part of this that's really interesting is that he cited Caleb Williams, who he qualifies as a generational talent, who could incite teams to tank for him, and that would make the NFL have to turn to an NFL draft lottery to prevent that from happening. So I think there's a good amount to unpack here, but what's your initial reaction to what Sean Payton said?
So my initial reaction is I'm not a fan of the lottery system. I think obviously you're going to have teams tanking regardless, because I think if you're not going to make the playoffs, you're in need of a quarterback. You say, well, might as well have a better chance to get the first overall pick. I'm not a big basketball fan. I'm pretty sure that still happens in the NBA. They're not guaranteed the first overall pick, but I'm pretty sure teams tank. And it is worth noting that all of the 3 other, top 4 sports leagues all have this implemented now. The NBA has had this for a while. The NHL has had this for a while. And the MLB just started the draft lottery as well. So the NFL is the only one without this draft lottery. My reason why I don't think this will happen, this is not my idea. I've heard Mike Florio on Pro Football Talk about this. The NFL won't do a draft lottery because they don't want to admit that teams tank. If they implement a draft lottery, they're saying to the world, yes, we know teams tank. And we saw with the Dolphins, They do not want that. They don't want anyone. We all think that teams tank. They don't want anyone thinking that. They want everyone thinking each team is trying to win every single game. And by implementing a draft lottery, they're admitting that tank.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think there's that much tanking in the NFL. I think there's some.
I totally agree.
I think that it comes from the ownership, perhaps the general manager, but I think at every point in the season, no matter how bad the team is, no matter how late in the season it is, every player on that field is trying to win that game, and the head coach is trying to win that game. I think if you look to the Detroit Lions, that's a prime example. Last year, they were a really bad team, and you had Dan Campbell and a group of really fired up guys that towards the end of the season were still fighting tooth and nail to go get a couple wins on the season. And that's why I don't really see the need for the lottery, because where you might have an owner, it was alleged that Stephen Ross, the Dolphins owner, it tried to make his coach tank, but I just don't think that it ends up resulting in tanking on the football field often at all. I think it's extremely rare, if not maybe never happening. So that's why I don't think it's necessary.
I 100% agree with that. Obviously, like you said, there are teams that tank. I know in 2015, the end of the 2014 season, I'm pretty sure the Bucs tanked the last game of the season where they pulled stars out in the second half of a game that they were winning. But it's not a full season tank. It's maybe the last game of the season. The Eagles, for example, a couple years ago, it could be argued that they tried to tank the last game, but I don't really think it's that big of a deal. I mean, do we think the Houston Texans are tanking right now? I don't think so. I just think they lack a lot of talent on that team. Davis Mills is, or not even Davis Mills anymore. Kyle Allen is trying to win. Damian Pierce is trying to win. Those rookies on defense are trying to win. Lovie Smith is trying to win. I just don't think they have a lot of talent. I think they need the first overall pick to improve their team. And if I was a Texans fan, I would say, like, my biggest hope is that we get the first overall pick right now to kind of build our team a little bit, because we don't really have a lot of talent. And I would be a little disappointed if, the Lions, right, got the first overall pick. Obviously, the Lions could use it, sure, but they're a lot better team than the Texans.
Yeah. And the other side of it is, who says you're not going to get that tanking anyways? If whatever like minor tanking there is, and you're right, I think it's like, second half of the last week of the season, you might pull some starters if you're winning to try to get the first overall pick. Well, if you have a 38% chance of the first overall pick, maybe you're doing that anyway. So that's another reason. Before we get off the air, I also want to address the part about Caleb Williams being a generational talent that you might want to tank for, and that might incite the NFL to move to a lottery. That really stuck out to me, and I haven't gotten to watch too much of Caleb Williams, but I'm excited to get to watching him probably next summer, since he's not draft eligible yet. But next summer, when we're getting into the 2024 guys, I really want to see what all the hype is about with Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and I do too. What I kind of get from that is Sean Payton want to get back into coaching for Caleb Williams? There's a lot of rumors that he might get in the 23
it's a difficult gamble
coaching cycle. Will he hold off another year and go to that team that has the first overall pick and take Caleb Williams? I mean, could that happen? That's what, when I heard that second half of the quote, I was kind of like, ooh, is Sean Payton kind of hinting that, yeah, I would tank for Caleb Williams? Is that what he's saying here? So that's kind of interesting storyline to watch out for. I think there's some rumors that Sean Payton might get in 2023. If he holds off in 2023, he might be holding off for Caleb Williams in 2024.
I think that's a really interesting idea, and we'll leave off on that. Leave with a bang. Thanks everyone for watching. Enjoy the rest of the NFL season. Think a little bit about this NFL draft lottery possibility. Enjoy Caleb Williams, who maybe we'll be seeing winning the Heisman soon, and have a good rest of your football season. We'll be back towards the end of the season with another rookie review podcast. See you, everyone.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.